Well, good morning and welcome. My name is Eric Liles. I'm the Associate for Formation here at St. Michael and All Angels Episcopal Church in Dallas, Texas. And we're so excited to bring you this Zoom conversation this morning. This will be part 2 of our series that we're starting this spring with, My Story. This is Christianity, Multiculturalism, and the Faith of Our Neighbors. And we are blessed with 2 other great people in this conversation today. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves in just a minute. This video will be a follow-up to our first video, which Wes was so gracious to record for us. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Wes, and what we need to know.
Sure. Wes Allen. I teach preaching at Perkins School of Theology at Southern Methodist University, just down the road a little bit. I was with you 2 years ago, I guess, in part of your series, and glad to be back. So part of my interest in talking about preaching is how do we preach in postmodernism. So I look at different worldviews going on in congregations also. So that's part of my interest in our conversation today.
Thanks, Wes. And we're joined also with by Kathy Hayes. Kathy, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, I'm a parishioner at St. Michael and have been for the last 30 years. I was raised in the Episcopal Church, but I wasn't quite a cradle Episcopalian. I am the lay person that helps Eric do the adult formation classes, and I was invited to participate. Thank you again, Wes, for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both for being here. So as we've kicked off the series, if you haven't watched the first video that Wes did for us, talking about pre-modernity, modernity, post-modernity, truth, how we understand these things. It's a really great video. I encourage you to maybe pause this one, go back and watch that one. As a continuation of that, we wanted to talk today about a couple of different groups of people that we probably encounter in our daily lives. And those primarily are those who might consider themselves spiritual, but not religious. Sometimes we refer to them as nuns, N-O-N-E, not N-U-N-S. And it's going to be an interesting conversation that we're going to have to talk about how we engage our friends and family and strangers and people we meet in our lives who fall into this growing category within the United States. I think it might be helpful just to kind of start off with a general definition of what we're talking about. Wes, you want to start us with that? And then I've got another category of people I think I want to mention.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's very common nowadays to talk about people who consider themselves spiritual, but would not consider themselves religious. And what we mean by that is they're not interested in institutional religion with its hierarchical structures and someone telling them what's meaningful, what's true. Instead, they may be attracted to this or that element of different religious traditions, but they create their own sort of individual spirituality. And so it's very much sort of an outgrowth of Western individualism. But I can use Episcopalianism as a resource and Baptist as a resource and Buddhism as a resource. And I go down the cafeteria line and I pick out what I want. And for some people, this is a drive to create sort of a consensus, a consistent worldview. And for others, it's just whatever works for me today. So some of the surveys show that we're still one of the most religious nations in the world if you count by how many people believe in God, et cetera. But once you start talking about participation in institutionalized religion, it goes way down. So a Pew study recently, the last few years has shown that mainline Christianity numbers are going down. We used to think that meant evangelical numbers were going up, but actually they are coming down. For the first time, we're now seeing Catholic numbers coming down. They stayed steady for years and years, mainly because of immigration. But the one category that's rising consistently are the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, and that means not affiliated with any particular religion. That doesn't mean they don't have any religious outlook. There's just it's part of the phenomenon of more people bowling, but fewer people participating in bowling leagues in our country. It goes with that.
Interesting analogy. Does a group of atheist agnostic folk fall within the category of nuns, or do they have their own separate category as we look at these kind of research
That's a really good question. I don't know in terms of how, say, surveys categorize them. That's probably a good question. But they would certainly be different than the spiritual and not religious ones. Although, I mean, sort of, spirituality is a really hard term to define.
Sure.
And so sort of inward looking into the soul, the character of one's psychology, in relation to external things. Some of those people might even consider them spiritual, especially some agnostics. But generally, spiritual but not religious would be over here, and agnostic, atheist over here. But they might all fit under nones as not affiliated.
Sure.
But I would think of relating to them in different ways.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk about that, I think, in a little bit.
Okay.
Kathy, what's your experience as a university professor? I mean, you're at a private religious school of sorts, but as you've seen students come through now for these many years, do you have any anecdotal evidence or thoughts about kind of how the changing nature of generations as they've come through as student body?
Well, being in the academy, we're discouraged from proselytizing, so that it would be inappropriate for me to bring that up without being confronted with that kind of thing. I do see the students having less contact, less understanding of others. And that of course concerns me, but I can't ferret out a spirituality or lack thereof without having the student bring that up. And so I don't really have a good sense of that. I do have lots and lots of staff and other faculty members that claim to be a nun. And one of the things that I was curious about is that I'm always, I'm surprised. I don't know, at my age, shouldn't be surprised, but when they say that, I'm always taken aback. And I was hoping today that I could learn to answer some open-ended questions that would help me continue that conversation about their spirituality and being a nun without being offensive.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's all about relationship. And so if we have the opportunity to be in conversation with somebody, I mean, getting to know them and asking open-ended questions about, what's your religious background? I mean, did you grow up in a church or not? Did you have a good experience or not? I think those are all fair game just as we get to know people and begin to form relationship and trust and then share of ourselves. And that, I think, can pave the way to ask some of these questions that Wes is going to guide us through, like the perfect set of questions.
I've got all the answers.
All the answers. Good. That's exciting.
I do think about the fact that when I started in ministry, we used to talk about the teenager who would go off to college and leave the church and then come back to the church once they had children. That's gone. Right. I mean, we don't have that sort of generational plug anymore. And I see sort of some of this shift too by even people who come into seminary, so from various different denominational traditions, and they come much less prepared in terms of their own tradition even than did previous generations of students. And so they represent some of this smorgasbord approach to religion, and we're not making them into thinkers so everybody thinks the same at seminary, but we do have to sort of embed them back in the tradition more than we used to have to.
Right.
That's really interesting. Yeah, and I thank you for mentioning that sort of the old model of going off to college. I mean, I really think that stopped with the baby boomers. I mean, Gen X, my generation, is not a generation that came back after. I mean, and all of us now have finished college, and most of us are married and have children and that kind of thing. And we didn't. I mean, as a generation, we did not flock back to the church like boomers and previous generations did. And I don't know that we'll see that with the millennials right now or the next generation. And so, those of us who feel that the institutional church has a lot to offer people, actually a ton to offer, and I think all three of us are in that boat. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be on this call today. We do have a challenge to convince people either to give us a chance or to help us to rethink what we're doing. If we're doing something that is causing people to be anti-religious in their approach to spirituality and faith, those are things that we want to pay attention to and address. I remember, I just doing a little bit of reading about this, and one of the things, St. Michael's Episcopal Church is really blessed. I mean, we are continuing to grow in the midst of difficult times. This is an amazing church. We have incredible resources and programs and staff and all those things. And so we're really blessed to be able to think about some of these things from a position of strength, rather than from a position of fear or anxiety. But, the Episcopal Church, of course, has shrunk dramatically, as you mentioned, mainline Christian churches have, and the Diocese of Dallas. And we got several emails even this week, from people sort of just deriding that clergy are no longer essential workers and that kind of thing. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know that's a huge issue. I do know that the institutional church is less in the public light than it used to be, even, when I was a kid growing up. And that presents some challenges, but I think it also presents some interesting opportunities for us to think about how to engage people. I'd love to hear from either of you if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, I certainly think that the church of the 1950s, let's say, where everybody went to church on Sundays, and it was, there was such a connection with culture that it was hard to critique culture. And we live in an age where one of the benefits of shrinking, which is hard to sort of admit, is there's also a chance to say, okay, what does it mean for us to be faithful as a community to our tradition? I mean, we got to remember that Christianity started in a very pluralistic, multi-religious setting. And these Christians were oddballs. They were new. Well, now we're the established one. But getting back to a little bit on the margins is not bad for us to reclaim some element of it. Although we naturally want to see more people with us in the pews and all, because we think what we have is meaningful and important and true.
Absolutely. I know Kathy's really
explore that comment a little bit more. Nearly all of my close friends are not even nuns. I don't think, but I think they're agnostic. And so I was on a conference call to do research yesterday, and with 4 female co-authors, which is always wild and crazy. But when I told them what my opportunity was today, they started throwing out questions that I should pose. And I go, this is a Sunday school class for an Episcopal church, and not a roast. And so that I think that what it caused me to do was go, wait a minute. Why do I think that this is important that people join a church? And so that I would like to discuss that a little bit more.
Yeah. I'd be interested to know what their questions were, even if
me too. We might have to have another conversation where we do that. Bring them into the circle. But actually, I mean, I do think part of the issue is, let's stay away from theology for a second. Part of it is we believe in community,
right?
And our culture is moving away from that. It's not that we don't have little pockets of community. And I mean, I've even learned that virtual community is real community in ways that I resisted earlier on with new technologies and all. But we really do believe that this journey of being human, of trying to find ultimate meaning and all, means we need to be in community with others. And I'm not sure other people believe that. I also think it's really important that the church not look down on people who are atheists or agnostic or whatever. In some ways, we need to say, okay, what have we done wrong that they're not attracted to this?
Yeah.
I think few churches, for instance, deal with some of the scientific questions that a lot of those people have. And that's that's very much involved in the move to modernity and now to postmodernity. But I mean, when was the last time you heard a lecture that brought in evolution? And those kinds of things. And so, You add that, and then you add some of the public views of Christianity in the media from the early days of Falwell and the Christian right, et cetera. And mainliners have a hard time saying, wait a minute, there's more than one way of being Christian, one way of sounding as Christian. And so I think some of that we have to take into account when we have conversations with people who have some kind of animosity towards the church. What have we done as a community? Not what has Wes done, although I may have blamed myself, but what have we done that makes us less appealing and makes us a hurdle between people and Jesus Christ?
Right. Well, I think that for many of them, there wasn't an early childhood experience with the church, and so that's part of. But it's mostly, I'm too busy to have this as an activity. This is not an organization that I'm interested in being a part of. And so that makes me wonder, I guess I need to ask my co-authors when we're not doing research, what is it that you don't like, right? And, it could be that they don't really know. I mean, if they weren't raised in any sort of religious tradition, then I think that's, hard to know what you're missing. It sounds like it's an organization that has rules that may or may not fit into my belief system.
Right. Hey, that's well said, Kathy. And I want to go back to what Wes was talking about with community and the importance of the institutional church is really the last intergenerational community that exists in America. Right. I mean, with very, very few exceptions. And what I have learned outside of the church in my studies of biology, of psychology, is that human beings we are designed and have evolved to be in community, period. That's like proven. And when we choose to not participate in community, whether we have a bad family experience or we don't like organizations and their structure and those kinds of things, it's actually detrimental to our physical and mental health, let alone our spiritual health as well. One of the things that I love about St. Michael's and some of the other churches that I've been blessed to serve is that we really do have a focus on families with children. Now, if you are beyond the age of, if you've got grandchildren or your children are grown or whatever, that may sound like, well, you don't really care about us. It's actually quite the opposite. We all need to be in intergenerational relationships, not only with family, but with community, and a meaningful community where we find meaning and purpose together, where we do work together, where we worship together, where we study together, where we grow together. And the church does that best when we're represented across the generations. Teenagers need adults in their life that they trust who are not their parents. I mean, it's proven, right? Where can you find that? Well, you can find that through scouting and some other organizations, potentially through teachers and extracurricular activities. But I was blessed to find that in the church. I grew up in the Episcopal Church and have always known that there's been a community there. Now, it doesn't mean that there's not conflict within that community. It doesn't mean that there's not disappointment with that community. It doesn't mean that there are times where we don't feel like we necessarily always want to be there, but it does provide a foundational level of relationship and support for people of all ages. So when we prioritize families with children, we're actually prioritizing everybody, because we're saying we need people in their 80s, we need nonagenarians, we need people who are just retired, we need empty nesters, we need everybody, because it takes everybody to help everybody live into that reality of community. And I think that's one thing invitationally that I think can be helpful to the nuns. I think most of the nuns that I know tend to be isolated in generationally, tend to be, almost all of their relationships are with people who are right around their same age. And so there's an opportunity I think we have in the church to say, we have something to offer, again, before we get to theology and faith, that provides a supporting environment for all people.
I think that's one of the things that I really like about St. Michael is the opportunity to mentor younger students, younger people through the confirmation process and teaching classes that, I could probably volunteer to go on some of their field trips, but I think that that's a great opportunity. But also for someone my age, it's nice to have a variety of people to talk to. I talk to economists all day long, and or academics, and they're wonderful people, but they can be flat, and they don't have.
We are recording.
Well, I'm not Wes, but
Everybody else.
Right.
yeah, but up here in Dedman College, in the arts and sciences, we tend to be very focused on a very narrow topic, and that there's not a lot of conversations about other things. And so that's what I love about going to church, is the fact that I can talk to people. I can talk to very different people. I can learn about different ways of thinking, because, the nice thing about being Episcopalian is that we, don't all agree.
Yeah.
And so, and that's okay. And that's why I really feel so comfortable in the church, I think, is that if I could bring that comfort level to some of my folks that I know that are nuns, if I could express that in a way that they could feel, so before the pandemic, I was really very active in trying to get some of my friends to participate in service activities,
right.
Because I think that's one thing that is difficult as a nun to do effectively.
Mm-hmm.
There's ways that you can do it, but you also have to go out and find that way. Whereas with St. Michael's just providing all those opportunities to get to serve others.
Yeah, that's a great entry, a great invitation. Come join us for some of our service, some of our outreach. Come join us as we go and hang out with kids who live in a different part of town, who need, some positive, role models in their lives. Those kinds of things are really, I think, powerful. And that invitation, I think, is a really good one. So, Wes, I'm going to put you on the spot. If you were going to preach a sermon to a group, let's say 100, 200 people who don't affiliate with any particular faith tradition, what would be 1, 2, or 3 kind of main points you would want to deliver in a message that you were to give them about how you have found value in the institutional church? And maybe that will help us. I mean, I don't really feel like I'm putting you on the spot, because this is kind of what you do.
It is. But it's a great question. And so let me back up before I build an answer to it, because I want to respond to something Kathy had said. Is one of the things I think we first have to recognize is that in the same way the three of us are talking about how much meaning we have found in the church, these people all find the same kinds of levels of meaning. Well, not all. Many of these people find same kinds of levels of meaning in something else. Yeah. It may be family. It could be something destructive, for that matter, too. Money, or those kinds of things. One of the things theologian Paul Tillich taught us is he said there's no such thing as an atheist if you understand faith correctly.
Right.
And what he meant is that faith means that we all have something that we hold of ultimate concern, right. Something in our hierarchy of concerns that we put at the top. If we call that faith, then everybody has that. Mm-hmm. We may fail. We three certainly fail at times, but we try to put God in Christ at the top in our service to church and the world and our relationships and family. I'll do that. Other people have other things at the top. Mm-hmm. So they make meaning of the world.
Right.
That for them makes sense and is powerful. So if I were invited to such a group, the first thing I might say is that I might resist doing a sermon. That's where I'm going right now is, okay, me talking to them is probably not the approach. I would probably invite a conversation instead. And I think what works in a postmodern kind of context, and a lot of these nuns at least have postmodern leanings of sorts, is that I want to find a way to listen to their story and to tell my story. I want to validate their story. It's not I'm listening to their story to find a chink in the armor so I can go, oh, there's the rust. That's where I need to insert the gospel and break. No, I mean, I have to be open enough to say, I could learn something from them. I could learn something meaningful from them that even given my church experience, I've missed.
Right.
And so I've got to always be willing to change. You know, the Protestant principle, the church reformed and always to be reformed, needs to apply to myself individually. So I think I'd want to have that conversation. And then when I preach to a congregation of the faithful, you know, you go to scripture, you go to tradition, the sources, but with these people, I would go to experience.
Yeah.
I would talk about my experience of God, my experience of following Christ, and talk about it at that kind of personal level, to invite them then to tell their story, but maybe they'll find something in mine that's attractive. And then we can move on to deeper questions. But I think that would be my entry point.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it, I would try and imagine, well, why is it that they find other things more meaningful than Christian faith?
Right.
And so I can't answer some of the personal kinds of things, but if I can imagine some of the cultural things, science. So I'm not necessarily trying to do sort of the apologetic defense of Christianity here, just trying to say, this is how I deal with those things. Yeah. Which, by the way I deal with those, as you were sort of hinting at, Kathy, a lot of other Christians would go, whoa, wait a minute, that's not Christian. You know, it's my way of understanding the faith out of my own tradition. And that's the most I can offer, I think, at a beginning point. So did I avoid the question, Eric, or did I answer?
That was perfect, Les. That was perfect. And actually what you've just communicated, although you sort of said, you know, some Christians might be like this, that's actually, you know, what Jesus did. And if we're going to be followers of Jesus, it's about relationship. It's about loving the other person. It's about meeting them where they are, not to find what's wrong in their lives, but to offer them what's good about our experience of God and faith. And so I think that answer is really, really important and profound. I want to shift just a little bit to talk about, one of the questions about how do you engage people, and I think this suits all of our conversation for all people who we might categorize as or self-identify as nuns, but also for atheists and agnostics. And I just wanted to share one of my reflections on that. When I went an undergrad, and it's been over 20 years, I took psychology of religion, and we had different people make presentations on different aspects of their faith and psychology. And it was a really fascinating time. And I remember the student who was the president of the Atheist and Agnostic Society, you know, did a presentation, and it was very disturbing because he did it on Satanism. And I thought, well, how do you like, that is actually a faith, but if you're, you know, anyway, and it was tough. But also just in the conversations with folk that I've had over the years, you know, the question I like to ask is this: human beings we're designed to try to make meaning out of our life and existence. And there's a couple of specific aspects of making and defining meaning that I think are really good questions for us who belong to the institutional church, are great questions for people who are spiritual but not religious, and I think are essential for those people who are atheist or agnostic. And those two things are this: what do you do when you have an experience of awe or wonder? What do you do with that? How do you, is it a biological, electrical, chemical reaction that's causing you to feel this? And then why? Because what's their evolutionary purpose or whatever, if you're going to just be scientific. So if you have an experience of awe or wonder, witnessing a child being born, a really profound sunset, the planets coming together we just had a couple weeks ago, and all those kinds of things. And the other one is, what do you do when you feel especially grateful or thankful, but you don't have anyone to thank? Do you know what I mean? I mean, those are the two things that I kind of keep coming back to. They make sense to me. I know where to place that thing, but I wonder about people, and I've had conversations with friends and associates and colleagues who, you know, what do you do with those things? So I just wanted to offer that. And if you guys have any, you want to reflect on that or have any thoughts about those two ideas, I welcome those.
Well, I use this analogy in class sometimes. I talk about when we preach, so I'm teaching students who are learning how to preach. One of the things we're doing is we're creating sort of a language system for our people, a way to describe the world, a grammar of faith, if you will, some of these kinds of things. And people in the pews, as well as us in the pulpits, come with different language systems that we apply. So for instance, you get two people standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon, and both of them just, wow, this is so beautiful. So they agree on that. And then one goes, I don't understand how anyone could look at this and not see the power of God.
Right.
And the other person goes, I don't see how anyone could look at this and not see the power of water to erode the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Both are right.
Right.
Right. So, but they name it very differently. So I think there's that. Now, the flip side of your second question, of course, is there someone to blame when things
Right.
don't go right in my life? So the theodicy question, if God's all loving, all powerful, all knowing, then why is there suffering and evil in the world? So the gratitude goes both ways. So let me tell a little story of a way I sort of think about this same thing you're naming. I was the dean of the chapel at DePaul University in Indiana, small United Methodist liberal arts school up there in nowhere, Indiana, Greencastle, Indiana, in the middle of nowhere. And I'd just been hired on as the chaplain for the school and all. And so some 20-year-old thought, I'm going to get this new religious guy on the radio, on the college radio station, and I'm going to bring in the well-known atheist biologist on campus. And I brought in a student leader of a religious organization, and we're going to create a fight. So so I said, sure, I'll come in. And so she introduced, and then she asked about creation right off the bat. And so the biologist explains the Big Bang and evolution, ... They turn to me and I go, yeah, that's good. Which is just not very good radio, right? And so she kept trying to prod, and he started trying to prod. And finally he says, look, then it sounds to me like you're just like me. You're atheist. And I said, no, here's the difference. You think we construct all meaning from inside ourselves. Right. I think there is meaning external to me. Mm-hmm. And I see that meaning through the lens of God and Jesus Christ. And the biologist went, well, you're exactly right. That is where we're different. And we became good friends and colleagues through that. But so I think some people think all that gratitude and all is turned inside, or it's just because of coincidence, etc. But I look for meaning, truth, joy, comfort in suffering, etc., to outside myself. And so for me, that's a major distinction of how I think about those things.
I think to kind of maybe wrap up our time, unless you'll have any other pressing questions or thoughts, I wonder, the reason we're talking about nuns in the context of this Christianity, multiculturalism, and the faith of our neighbors is because we want to take this population seriously. We want to be in relationship with this population, but I actually think there's more. I think we want to invite them to join us in the institutional church. I wonder if you all have some particular reasons why that might be an important work for those who might be watching this video. Why should I bother talking to my coworker about my faith? Why? They're going to do their own thing. It's America. Everybody has freedom to do whatever they want. It doesn't really matter. Why does it matter for us to welcome in those who may be spiritually curious, who may, in fact, actually, I think that's our 10-year mission statement for St. Michael's, is to be a spiritual home for the spiritually curious in Dallas. So, but why would we make that a priority? Why would we focus on that? Do you guys have thoughts on that?
I think that's a great question for people who are watching this to ask and have conversations about and all. I'll just say, this is important to me. And if it means something to me, why wouldn't I share it with people I care about? That doesn't mean I force it upon them or I try and browbeat them or persuade them, but I offer it to them. I don't have a lot to offer a lot of people, but this is important to me. So, and I that means too, I've got to be willing to receive what they want to offer to me. And that's part of it. But I've given my life to this stuff. So I think it's worth them having. So I'm going to share it.
That's great, Wes. Kathy, how about you?
I think that inviting nuns to participate in the church gives us that are religious an opportunity to diversify our understanding of others, and that it does. It also gives us a chance to show them what it actually means to us and how we experience that. But for me, as a regular lay person who hasn't practiced this intensely for years and years and years, to me, it's about expanding my horizons in the people I know, and the beliefs that are held, that I tend to, and I think a lot of people are like me, tend to isolate myself with people that are alike. And that given me the opportunity to engage with people that are very, very different in their belief systems than what I hold to be true is important to keeping me young and healthy.
Yeah, that's great, Kathy. Yeah, just to reflect on what both of you said. So I think a Theology of Gift, which is a work within the Christian church, and the theological realm, basically would come to the conclusion that the best gifts are the ones that we receive that are meant to be shared with others, right? So that's exactly what Wes was saying about, this is important to me, and I don't have a lot to give, but God has given me the gift of this relationship, of this love, of this acceptance, and that's a gift that I'm supposed to share with other people, not force upon them, as you said, but to offer, to say, I've had this really profound experience of love and acceptance, transformation. I would love for you, person that I care about, that I'm in relationship with, to have a similar type experience. And along with what Kathy was saying, there's another theological strain that talks about the gift of the stranger, that Christ is only known in the other. Like we don't encounter Christ in ourselves in new ways. It's the familiar, and oftentimes it's the fallen and broken ways. But when we encounter somebody who is other than us, different, particularly if they're a stranger or new or have different experiences or beliefs, we have an opportunity to meet Christ anew. And that can really transform and change us as well. So thank you both so much for this time together. This has been really personally helpful and meaningful for me. And I hope those who are watching and have tuned in have enjoyed it as well. Any final thoughts or comments?
Just thank you for having me.
Wes, thank you so much for being here. Kathy, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.